They call it patriotism, but we call it what it is: pure, unfiltered bullshit. Welcome to Bluebird on Your Shoulder, where we cut through the MAGA madness with brutal honesty and zero apologies. No sugarcoating, no fake civility, just three guys, middle-aged and pissed off, breaking down the absurdity of right-wing delusion one episode at a time. If you think America deserves better than conspiracy theories and cult worship, you're in the right place. Liberal? Hell yes. Woke? Not a chance. We're here to roast the madness, expose the lies, and call out the grift. Because the only thing worse than MAGA's nonsense is pretending it makes sense. New episodes every week. Buckle up.
You want me to go right now? Thank God for editing, right?
Yeah, right.
All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bluebird on Your Shoulder. I am Josh. The other guy is Josh. Ryan is absent at a baseball game for one of his kids. So it'll just be us and maybe him a little later. We do not know. Another fun-filled week of controversy. Some money making if you were smart, some illegal money making if you're really smart. At least that's the way it seems. So we're just going to start there. As I'm sure all of you know, there was a huge dip and then a huge gain, record gain. From what they're reporting, is the largest one-day gain in history. Part of me feels like, you can say insider trading just because of how it all went down. If you don't know, the night before the bond market, there was a massive sell-off after hours. And what those are essentially government secured bonds. So like you can never default on them. So they are the most reliable as far as investing your money.
Other than gold, which
Correct. Yeah. But essentially they're secured by the government. So the only way you can really quote unquote lose money on them is if our government defaults. And if our government defaults, then we're speaking Chinese.
right.
Or Russian, but more than likely Chinese. So that happened the night before the crash on, what was that, Friday it started, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. So Thursday night, that happens. Market goes down. I thought it was going to be one of those one day drops real heavy, and then Monday when it opens, it would shoot back up.
Right.
My dumbass bought on that first initial big dip around 3:30, 4 o'clock on Friday, right before the market closed. And then was losing my ass Monday and Tuesday until about, whatever time, first thing in the morning. I think, was it Tuesday or Wednesday? I can't remember which. I think it was Wednesday morning. He tweeted out something about now is a good time to buy. And then 30 minutes later, the market starts shooting up at a record pace.
Yeah.
That, to me, signals insider trading and that this was planned and
Well,
that had nothing to do with the tariffs.
If nothing else, it's market manipulation. Even if it's not insider trading, it's market manipulation, which is illegal still.
Yes, yeah. And everyone wants to say, "Oh, it's because he made the announcement of the tariffs."
Yeah.
And why? Yeah, to the common folk who's not really paying attention, that's what it was.
Right.
Oh, he paused the tariffs, so everyone's calming down and investing their money again instead of selling off. So that's the way it looks.
Yeah.
However, if you look deeper into it, and then there's a video of him in the Oval Office bragging to his Wall Street guys that this guy made, 2.5 billion today, and he owns Charles Schwab. And like, if you don't think those guys are in on it, like, you are more ignorant than what MAGA is.
Yeah, that's why the market started that rally, was because they knew that they were at the bottom. So they bought in, and that signaled to everybody else to start buying in. And then we saw 90-day hold on tariffs. So
which I think ultimately because I don't think they are stupid enough to bring more attention in that matter to them, because then they will get looked at.
Right, right.
Uh, Even though some people like AOC and some others are calling for disclosures by the 15th of next month and to
Yeah.
look into investigation. Um, like you said to me earlier today, they've got technically, like legally, like 6 months. And at that point, that's enough time, like you said, to like cover
Yep.
up any tracks that you may have left behind.
Yep.
So I'm all for the 15th, but then it's one of those like, how hard is that to prove?
Right.
You know,
Well,
like
like I said, they're supposed to divest or hand their trading over to a broker, and they're supposed to stay over arm's reach. So they're not supposed to call directly and say, "Hey, I want you to make this trade."
right,
And if they do, they have to disclose that specific trade, and it can't be related to any committee that they sit on or
yeah.
anything like that where they might get an inside track,
Well,
and
and it was reported by Nasdaq that I forget what time it was, that they had a huge influx in calls, um,
yeah.
for trades. Which, I mean, take that for what it is. Like, I did mine all through an app, so like I don't have to call in. You know,
Well,
like,
that the
but
call is it's a digital marker of these trades were put in. So it's all digital now. There's nobody that calls up and down at the floor and says, "Hey, put 500 million on."
oh, I
That
bet there
doesn't.
is. I bet there is, because these people that got that much money, they have a financial investor that's doing it for them.
Right. But those financial investors, they use high speed
Yeah, like
Ethernet
the software.
and
Yeah, yeah,
fiber,
yeah.
yeah,
That's
and software in order to get that extra
that's
millisecond, which makes them, an extra $1 million. So
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, who's to say, because that broker's doing it? Like, who's to say that that broker isn't? Because like that's kind of their job, right? Is like you
right,
give them a chunk of money and they do it for you. So
right, right. And
it's going
that's
to
the
be near
idea.
impossible for them to prove, like, oh, so and so MGT or whoever, like,
Right.
called me and said do this.
Yeah, so that's why they have aides, that will have the brokers, burner phone,
Yeah,
and they'll send something, and then the broker makes a big move, but he
right.
makes it with his entire portfolio of different accounts, and therefore it looks like he's just making a smart trade.
Yeah,
So it's masked in that way.
yeah. So when this 90 days is up, I don't think, like I was saying, I don't think that they will do that again, because that, I think, to me, that would throw up huge smoke signals
Right,
and
right.
draw way too much attention into what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, I guess what kind of baffles me a little bit, and I feel like at this point it shouldn't, is talking with some people that I know for a fact are just a regular Republican or a Trump supporter. I just talked with someone through text at dinner,
Yeah.
um, that I know is not necessarily MAGA, but they're for Trump,
Yeah.
because they did pretty well financially last time he was in office, and then lost. Things got hard when Biden was in office for whatever reasons. Not saying that Biden did a bad job, not saying he did a great job. Like, he
No.
served his purpose in what we thought was to get rid of Trump. So, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I
now that
wanted him
Trump's
to be
back
a
in
lame
office, of
duck.
course, he's back on the, let him do his thing. Like, things were great the last time. And, I mean, if you were trying to refinance your home or sell your home and it was appreciating, things like that, like, I'm starting to notice that trend again, that homes are appreciating, but we're also coming into prime selling season.
Right.
um
Yeah.
so values are naturally going to go up, and so it just
Well,
kind of
and also
take
inflation has ticked back up above 2.5%. So, you know, that's also part of it is, as goods are inflated, the cost of building goes up, so
yeah,
therefore appreciation happens.
right.
you know, and then, that kind of moves into, what interest rates are doing right now. And that was something that I wanted you to explain a little bit, as far as how that market works.
Yeah, so we'll just start with the inflation and the report from March, because I'm sure, as you guys realize, numbers come out roughly 3 to 4 weeks after the prior month. The
Right.
jobs reports, the all that. Like, the month has to end, they have to collect the data, they have to report it.
Yep.
So March's inflation came out and it actually slowed, better than what they anticipated. And the jobs report came out at 228,000, which was much, much higher
Like
than what they
125,000 higher
anticipated.
than what they planned. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but they didn't even, like, that's how stupid they are, is they didn't even want to talk about that stuff.
Right.
Like, to make yourself look good, you didn't even want to tout that stuff.
Yeah.
You want to talk about everything else, about we're cutting this, we're cutting this, we're cutting this, but then we don't want to talk about that it's actually illegal for you to cut it and the judge blocked you.
Yeah.
And
Well,
now you're asking the Supreme Court to allow you to fire board members. Um, so there was the inflation that slowed a little bit, which helps, right? And then there was the jobs report that
yep.
makes people feel confident.
Yep.
Um,
And so we
so
saw we
then,
saw a tick down in interest rates by about 0.5%.
yeah, total
Right.
within a week. And then yesterday and today, we lost all that. It's right back to where it started at 7% for a 30-year mortgage,
Yep.
which is the highest it's been since July of 2 years ago.
Right.
And a 20-year was down to 6 flat. Like, so it was starting to, like, kind of come into play where, okay, are we going to get back to that 30-year average of 5.5?
Right.
Like five for a 20, 5.5 for a 30.
Which is what the industry says is a good stable interest rate
Yep,
long
which
term.
indicates a good
Yep.
stable economy.
Yeah, right.
And we were headed in that direction, and then he announced these tariffs, and the market drops, and that shit shot right back up to where we are. And
Right. And now it's not just the stock market and the economy, but also, where do we get those interest rates from? Why is it that the Fed influences those rates, and what that rate does to influence mortgage interest rates?
well, it's all based on consumer confidence. Um, our buying power, the value of our dollar, and tariffs put a huge, huge damper on the value of a dollar. Like, I think Canada's money is actually higher than our dollar now
Yep.
for the first time, and I don't know how many decades that I read. Um, it's just
Well, and
and
and and the other thing about consumer confidence is also, other countries' confidence in our ability to pay our debts, and so they're less willing to buy those bonds that we sell in order to, be able to keep running the economy and to signify our ability to pay these debts.
well, yeah, and like doing all and then he wants to come out. Was it yesterday? He put the 90-day hold on.
Yeah.
And wants to come out and say, well, we don't want to put tariffs on countries that we don't need to hurt, but we're going to maintain the 125% on China.
Right, right.
Which, that's whatever. Like, we're never going to be friends with China.
Right, but they are the number one buyer of our debt.
Yeah,
So,
but I don't think that they are. They absolutely are. They're the ones that helped Obama bail us out in '09.
right,
They bought up all this mortgage debt and everything. So they could really screw us over as far as that goes if
yeah,
they essentially, like a banker would, call the
right.
note due.
Follow the note, and then we also have the problem where we can't sell these bonds without, offering a high interest rate, which is only going to spike inflation even farther.
Even further,
So,
yes.
So, that is a huge concern about the complexities of, the world economy and how our dollar is going to be affected within the trade war. So, even if we do end up, winning the trade war, nobody wins a trade war.
No,
But even if we were to win it, you know, the weakening of the dollar means that it's not going to have any benefit to us.
no,
So,
yeah, and I mean, there's a few things there. One, I guess immediately, as you mentioned, the trade war, quote unquote. The
right,
last time there was a quote unquote trade war, the Great Depression happened.
right, right.
Um, so let's hope to God that that doesn't take place. Two, us placing tariffs on everybody else and messing with the world economy
Mhm.
is a because we have the number one and number four, number seven
Number five.
economy in the world in our countries
Yeah.
and California alone.
Yeah. California is the
Um,
fifth largest economy in the world.
to the point that they are fed up with him and these tariffs that they're reaching out to other countries to try to figure out something on their own. That is a massive economy.
Yeah,
Um,
and like America as it is wouldn't exist without that economy. And if we
Absolutely
push,
not, because all their federal taxes essentially is enough to fund all of the federal aid our country gets.
yes,
So you take that away, and you got a whole lot of homeless, hungry, dead people.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but then
you
on
don't
top of
have farm
that is
subsidies that even out grocery prices.
correct.
You don't
Yeah,
have exports for the entire West Coast, doubling any export cost because you'd have to go into the Gulf and through the Suez Canal,
right.
just to get out there. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
and
then the
we
other thing is he
was
wants to
it
do this trade war, what looks like now specifically with China, because he doesn't want to back down because he has to be the winner and
right, right.
win the deal. However, I don't think that he realizes, or maybe even other people realize, where China is at in their economic growth.
Yeah,
Um, they are kind of in a hybrid as to where our economies were. If you blend in the industrial revolution boom and the technology boom in the Bill Clinton era and mix those together and how those economies shot up, that's where they're at right now.
I would put it
They don't
more I would put it
essentially
more the
need us.
technology boom and our position in the world directly after World War II, where we got to shape, the world economy how we saw fit, and because we were the saviors of Europe. And so, we started moving into Africa, the Middle East. That's how we got,
Yeah,
the oil deals that we have with the Middle East. And we did all of this trading in order to grow our export business and get cheaper goods in so that our economy could chug and chug and chug.
yeah,
And that's, yeah, like that's the point, is that they are doing exactly what we were doing then, which is stabilizing the world, putting in infrastructure in growing markets, and then taking advantage of business opportunities from those markets.
yeah.
So,
And my personal fear as an American who hopefully is alive a while longer is if China, because like for that goes, they don't really need us. We
right,
need them.
right.
Um, as far as goods go, like they don't need us.
No.
Um, my fear is that they take the reins as now the modern day world leader. We never get it back.
Yeah, I mean that's been my drum that I've been beating for since Trump took office the first time. I'm really concerned with us losing that position on the world stage, and we're doing it to ourselves. This xenophobic, we got to take care of ourselves, and we can't be helping them anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're on
Attitude,
a human rights watch list that China was on forever, and now
right?
people are looking at them for, like, for them to lead. Like,
Yeah.
that's fucking scary.
Yeah, and we're the ones that have committed war crimes and withdrew our participation in the UN's, Human Rights Council, and we're withdrawing from WHO, which was, a driver in medical stability across the world.
Yeah.
And and China is more than happy to say, hey, we got this. We have got this.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah,
take
because
we'll
they
we'll
see
go and
that
take it on.
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
we're playing with fire and not realizing that we've already gotten burned.
Yeah. Well, and then, he wants to, you mentioned war crimes, so I guess we can kind of just flow into the next topic a little bit. Is earlier in the week, Mexico's president released a statement saying that there was an attack, which, quote unquote, reportedly in American news was on a cartel. However, it was on civilians through a drone strike.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're naturally not happy about that, and are saying that they will defend, their land by land, air, and sea, as they should. I do
Yep.
not blame them
Yep.
once a bit for that.
Yeah.
Um, but this is supposed to be our peacetime president, and he hasn't done this, this, and this, and yada, 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 except for they fail to remember the umpteen thousand missiles that were dropped on Yemen, in his first term, and does this to Mexico, and then is basically telling
And then
Iran, who is the fastest growing economy in the world, that if you don't do what I say in regards to our nuclear program agreement, I'm going to fire on you.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, yeah, you've spanned a lot there. Mexico, having unauthorized drone strikes on a sovereign nation, that's an act of war. And on top of that, if we look back at, what was it, 2012 to 2014, the major gripe about Obama was all the drone strikes. You
Yes.
know, we were hitting targets without clearing it with nations, but
Right.
now it's okay to hit one of our neighbors without clearing it with them. And that's not the way that the DEA or the CIA operate. They usually clear those types of strikes or at least get an authorization to operate, So because you had to have had somebody on the ground to bring those strikes in. You had to have
Yeah.
people there, and then we go over to Yemen, then we get to talk about the fiasco with all of the officials texting on an app that's unsecured, and and so um we're we're flagging our moves and letting them letting them know exactly what we're doing, and all of that again, like you said, with while we're trying to bluster against Tehran and get them to capitulate to our nuclear demands after we abandoned Ukraine, who
Yeah.
gave up their nuclear weapons with the promise that we would come and defend them from Russia if they ever got aggressive. So why would anybody want to deal with us when it comes to nuclear technology in any way? And then on top of that, you know, Iran is, an axis for, the Russia, China power,
Right.
and and are reacting to our support of genocide through Israel to Palestine.
Yeah.
In all of these situations, we are the ones that are wrong, and we're just trying to make it worse by letting Trump, bluster and try to, you know, make deals by, threatening and showing force, but then, but then ultimately not getting anything done or even making things worse and then claiming victory. But all of that with a defense budget that they're talking about growing by $400 billion, which is almost twice as much as what it is now, while we're reducing our personnel strength by 80,000, which is what, like almost 20% of our force. So how exactly are we going to be moving against, these enemies that we're making when we don't have allies because we're pissing them off? We don't have UN support because we're being dicks, and then we have a reduced force to be able to support the technology investments that we're throwing a lot more money at than what we're saving with Doge supposedly canceling already completed contracts. And this is where we get into real danger, because if you go at an adversary and threaten them, but you don't have the teeth to back it up without violating the law of war, then you make an enemy of the world, and we cannot afford that right now.
No,
Especially if we want to do any of these things that, the Trump administration is proposing, which some of it I could get behind if there wasn't all of this that we had to sort through. And we've got, little Marco, who looks like a 5-year-old sitting there way over his head,
oh
who
yeah,
can't even begin to do his job because there's fires being put
everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like you don't know where to begin, and like the whole story, right? Like he's essentially threatening all of these countries, including our own quote unquote friends, we'll call allies, right?
Might as well be
Like,
threatening ourselves, like,
so it reminds me of the whole like elementary schoolyard bully, right? Like
yes.
pick on all the little people until someone gets tired enough and punches you in the mouth, and then you're the one that goes and cries
Yep.
to the
And gets
teacher.
the teacher involved. Yeah.
Right. So it also reminds me of World War II when Hitler isolated Germany so
Yes.
much, with the fascism, the nationalism,
The
which
nationalism and the
and, well,
xenophobia. Yeah.
I'm all for the nationalism to a point. Be proud of your country, buy
Patriotism
American,
isn't
whatever. Like,
nationalism.
what's that?
I said patriotism is not nationalism.
That is true, and it that is true. Um, but it just is very eerily similar to how Germany essentially isolated themselves.
Absolutely.
Um, Especially
And
nowadays
yeah,
when people get their feelings hurt so easily. Like you're to the point where the EU
yeah.
did a tariff back to us. So
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, your biggest ally,
The people that felt for 50 years like they owed us their freedom
yeah, is
are
now
now
essentially on the borders of being against us.
they're making deals with China. They're
Right.
making deals with the Middle East. They are
Because
working
they
with
all have
China,
leaders as crazy as they
right?
are logical when it comes to money and business instead of like this is not some little mom and pop shop that you extort
Right.
for safety like
Right.
you would in New York City during the
Yeah.
80s in the mob days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these are countries that we need, and we're not recognizing what they bring to the table. My marriage ended because my ex-wife couldn't recognize what I brought to the table, which was a lot. And so, me being America, I put up with a lot, and finally I got sick of it and said, "Hey, listen, either you acknowledge what I bring to the table and we work out something that is equitable, or this is over with." That's how you go to the negotiating table. You don't just say, "Hey, you know what? You're going to start giving me head once a week." Like that is not how a negotiation works. And until we get somebody who, you know, doesn't think that they're the God's gift to how to negotiate, we're not going to make any headway. Like I said, Marco doesn't even have the ability to start doing his job because
Yeah.
of everything that Trump is doing, and he's the one that should be doing all of this.
Well, and I mean, how can he when he just sit there and gets made fun of all the time?
Twiddles his
Like,
thumbs.
yeah, by his own people. Like, how can you do your how can you do your job? How can you do your job
Yep.
with any confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Like, so
understand
what
how
you're going to
any
go
of
to
them are
these
doing their
other
job.
countries and they're going to laugh at you because they know that you're not even the boss.
Right, right. Yeah, he's got no power in
No,
on the negotiating table
no.
because Trump's just going to say no. No. I said what I said. That's how it's
Yeah.
going to be, you know? And so everybody else in the world is sitting there going, well, I guess we're just going to have to figure something else out. So they're calling Mexico. That's why California is making their own trade deals
Yeah.
because they could very easily just say, "Hey, Oregon, Washington, you guys want to come with us? We're going to go and check out, you know, we're going to start our own party." And
Right. Well, yeah, and then what happens if they're successful at that? Then they resign from the union and we
yep.
lose all that tax money and we are fucked.
Oh yeah. Yeah, at that point, America becomes, the weakest at the big boys table, because we don't have the West Coast to trade with Asia.
Yep.
Australia, Asia, all of that is gone. And and they have access to Europe and Africa in order to, work those trade deals out. So at that point, we can't even come east because we've pissed off Europe, the only ones that would have still traded with us, you
Yeah.
know?
And
And
then we
then
can't
and then
even
Canada and Mexico both have avenues for trade on that portion. What other states are going to join in at that point? Is Idaho going to go? Colorado would. Nevada, sure. Let us do our own thing. Let us be that purple state that everybody can go for their sins.
New
And
York
California, you
because
can do
of New
your own
York
thing.
City alone,
Yeah,
like
yeah. Well, New
and
York,
then
New York is kind of stuck. Like, the original 13 that, I don't see that ever changing. But, we could lose, a good portion of the west side of America.
yeah, and that would be a killer financially, let alone protection wise, like with the military, like
Mhm.
you got the Air Force base there in Miramar in Southern California. Like we wouldn't be able to use them
Colorado,
more. Yeah, Colorado. Like it's some serious
NORAD.
bases. Yeah, some serious bases around the coast and stuff there
Yep,
that we wouldn't have access to anymore because
exactly.
that they would be their own country essentially.
Hmm. Yeah. And they would, like, the only thing that they would be missing out on is, you know, food access by the farmers in the Midwest, but you know, a good trade agreement with China would fix that.
100%.
So,
Yep.
and then they could just negotiate with America, hey, how
Yeah.
about how about we negotiate with you states instead of the Fed, screw those guys,
Right.
and then the whole
Well,
thing.
and I mean, Northern California has a lot like they have very rich soil up there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yep.
there's the Green Triangle, there's
Okay.
the giant redwoods. Like they could grow, corn and beans and stuff like that if they wanted to. They've already got cattle. I
Yeah.
mean, they could do it for themselves. Like
I don't think that they would be able to be self-sufficient based on the population size and
no, but it would be
the,
close to
the
where they
sectors.
wouldn't. Yeah, I think it would be close enough to where they wouldn't really. I mean, you would need it to a point, but not dependent to feed everybody.
Oh no. I mean, like I said, they would make deals with China and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So like, the point is that, the United States is at real risk now because we have one person who thinks that he speaks for everybody when people in his own party are defecting. You
they
know,
really are. Yeah, there is a huge. They're calling it like a MAGA civil war right now, to
yeah,
where I mean, shit's erupting up on the floor, and they're walking out of voting for things
Oh yeah,
because
I mean,
they're not agreeing with things. Um,
Booker did his 24-hour
yeah,
stint and shut down voting for that entire week. You know,
right.
they called recess early because they weren't going to get shit done.
Yeah, yeah. And then I don't know if you saw any of the videos of some GOP senators being questioned about the tariffs on Friday.
Oh yeah,
And they were walking out saying, like, yeah, I did. Like, they're pissed off.
yeah.
Like that's solely him because I actually just read today and I don't know how he's doing it. Did you know that tariffs are actually supposed to be approved by Congress before
Yeah.
they're enacted?
Yeah, anything related to the purse is supposed
Yeah,
to be done
essentially,
through
yes. Yeah.
Congress. So,
Yeah.
yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean
So,
this is all just being disruptive because he doesn't have any real ideas that he's running on. He's borrowing ideas from 2025 and he's trying to do the same thing that he's always done, which is bully contractors or other countries and and then get his lawyers involved to try to push through as much as he can and then he calls it a win. Look how profitable I am,
yeah.
you know?
Yep.
And and that doesn't work on this type of scale. Like that might work when it comes to building a building and you trick a contractor into finishing work before you pay them, but that doesn't fly with trade. Like,
No. No, and I understand how people like the on the surface idea of running the country like a business. Like, oh, you're gonna cut costs and make profit, but presidential historians have reported and wrote peer-reviewed articles
mhm,
um, that any and every president who has tried to run America like a business has failed.
yeah, it's been a horrible
Yeah.
tenure. Yeah.
Hmm.
And not only that, but you know, like with the post office, it's not meant to be profitable because you when you run a business, you streamline processes by cutting out areas where you don't have a market. So you don't advertise, you don't spend production time, you don't open stores at places that you're not going to make money at. And
Right.
the post office serves everybody. And so, the farmers in Montana that are 20 miles apart, they still get mail daily. There's no profit there. It could never be profitable. So if we were to privatize the postal service, those people would lose service. They might get
Right.
it once a week, you know?
Right.
And
Yep.
and so when we're talking about economic growth and the logistics of moving goods, we don't talk about that with a profit motive. We talk about that as a stabilizer for the economy to be built on. And that's
Yeah.
what the federal government is. It's the platform in which the economy and everything that happens is built upon. It is not meant to be one of those buildings that makes a bunch of money. It is meant to be stable
Yeah.
and secure.
It I mean, it's really like yeah. I mean, if you take a step back and look at it, like overall, it's probably one of the best examples of being a humanitarian and doing what's right for the greater good of the people than there probably ever has been. And you would think that they having that they would be able to realize what that is. And A, they obviously don't and treat it like a business. And B, as far as human rights and our civil liberties, like they clearly don't see that as well either.
No.
Uh, so, I mean, that's a shame. And I've always said for a long time, um, you'll never get honest politicians until we take the big pharma and the NRA, like the big, don't corporate donors out of it and get that money out of their pockets.
Yeah.
Um, So I mean, we
I mean,
just have to.
until we revoke Citizens United and take money out of the campaign trail, then
Yeah,
we're never going to get quality candidates that are there to serve. We're always going
yeah,
to get people that are motivated by profit and motivated and need charisma in order to get the votes, in order to get the investment from those donors. So,
yeah,
I've always said that, the elected representative is a reflection of their constituency. Unfortunately, their constituency vote with their dollars instead of with paper in a box.
hmm
And until we can fix that, our democracy will never be reflective of the needs of the people. It will
oh
continue
yeah,
to favor only those that can pay for it. And that's what's really killing um, our constitutional republic, our
yeah,
democratic constitutional republic, for anybody that wants to argue that.
right. Um, another thing I saw this week was, I mean, you brought up Doge earlier, and I mean, they could save us a quick 97,000 or $97 million if we don't put on this 79th birthday parade for old President Peach.
Yep, yep.
Seeing how he wants to act like Kim Jong Un, who just did that a few years ago and put on a military parade.
Well,
Like
that's yeah.
$97 million, really? Like,
He brought that up in his last, um, tenure as well. And I shared that meme on our page. Roosevelt said that, acting like China or Russia by having a military parade makes us look weak. And that's
oh
all.
yeah,
There are no nations that are true superpowers that do that.
right,
And because they don't need to prove to their people that they're strong, they do it through negotiations, and when needed, their soldiers show up because they
right,
want to. You know, when you are conscripting troops like North Korea and Russia, then you have to prove that you're strong. Otherwise, you're going to have your people revolt. Nobody here is concerned with our military looking strong. We know we're strong.
right,
They know we're strong. So it's not something that we need to prove. And we sure as shit shouldn't be doing it for any leader. We serve the Constitution,
correct,
not the president.
right. Yeah. It's I mean it's obviously a huge ego stroke for him.
Right.
Um Somewhat embarrassing as a citizen of this country that we have a leader that feels the need to do that. Like what for? Like you want to put on display all the new shiny toys with your $1 trillion spending bill
Yeah.
for our defense. Like great. The entire
Which we
world knows they
supposedly
don't.
don't need because we're not going to war, right?
Right. Yeah. It Yet we're threatening everybody and anybody,
Right. Like he's
like
he's the president of peace. You know, and when I was talking with my AI, trying to get my head around what I wanted to focus on tonight, and um and he asked me what I would do differently, and I think that maybe I would like to hear what other people think that we should do differently. But my personal opinion is that diplomacy and stabilization through aid are the best ways to avoid armed conflict. And so if we would start to maybe trim up USAID and make sure that we're only giving needed aid in the form of medicine, food, and economic stability, then at that point we can send that out instead of threatening nukes, you know? And and going back to what we were talking about, what China is doing is they're investing in emerging markets with infrastructure and bringing that market to bear so that they can make a profit off of it. That's what we used to do. That's what makes America great is our ability to take our wealth and make change for the people that need it most. We've talked before about how, you know, the powerful aren't judged by how they treat their friends, but how they treat the poor and the sick and the old, you know, and and until we can start to realize that, leading with the gun is the worst possible outcome, then we're going to continue to fight in Fallujah. Instead, once we got Fallujah back, we were able to, go over with to win the hearts and minds. It wasn't the greatest mission. It wasn't glorious. I got shot at and couldn't shoot back, but we didn't kill people. We didn't kill civilians and kids, and
Right.
and their lives improved because of it. You know, and until people can step back and stop glorifying this blustering fool that wants to bully people, our nation is going to continue to erode and everything that makes it really great.
Yeah. I mean, and I think at least the way it's seeming is, and I say this because I've read several different political articles, that he's trying to find a loophole for a third term. Um, there's even been like the counter argument of, well, if he does, then Barack should run against him. And personally, I would love to see Barack kick his ass, because what better way to chap that white man's ass than to have old, Buddy, who
Yeah.
he thinks was
Well,
not a U.S. citizen, kick his ass.
Barack has actually talked on this. He's already said that he would never run because he believes that our country is great because we bring fresh ideas and we have leaders that bring different perspectives from different walks of life. And he doesn't feel like he is that anymore. He's spent his time and he is now part of that group that, has been. And he doesn't want to be relevant again. He thinks that we should be moving on into something better and greater. And and I would fight despite how much I really admire um, President Obama and his family. I don't think that that would be the right course of action. The only way to fight tyranny is with deliberate, honorable intention and action.
I
And
agree with that.
so I think that we need to be wary. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this is because we want to bring up things like, if this was to be a course of action that was taken, we could be looking at martial law, and at that point we wouldn't have an election. So we should be wary of, walking up to the midterms and things that he's doing, declaring, trying to declare war without Congress, and then forcing Congress into capitulating. Those are the things that we need to be wary of and identify how these things that most people don't understand are a real danger to a struggling economy. Even though ours did better than everybody else's after COVID, we are still struggling because of things like this and because of relationships that we're ruining.
Yeah, and I just, it just seems like that they may have had that aha moment, and to me, it comes off as like like the aha moment being, oh, we found the loophole. If we can get one of these countries to bite on our threat,
Yeah.
and then that we start attacking, or they attack, or vice versa, and
Yeah.
it becomes a conflict, and he declares war. There is no election. He's in for another, until that's done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only way that Congress is going to actually declare war is, because like, the global war on terrorism was still just an armed conflict
Right.
after, the initial push. So, we were never actually, you know, at full scale war where, where elections are put on hold.
Hmm.
We haven't been in that since World War II. So
Right. Yeah,
it
because
would
even the
have to,
Korean War is considered a conflict in
right.
Vietnam as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it would have to escalate to that point. And I don't think that even his narcissism could talk him into pushing that hard. And everybody's going to push back on that.
Well,
Even
yeah, because if he declares and it becomes a state of war, that's World War III because everybody's on go,
exactly, exactly.
and then
And
everybody loses.
yeah, and there's just no point in that. He's he is looking to enrich himself the best way possible and to set himself up for life. He fell in love with the idea of, you know, being recognized, to feed his ego, and then having a security detail to protect him and his family for the rest of his life
Yep.
for free, you know. And the possibility of maximizing his relationships to sell the Trump brand. That's all Trump is a
Yeah.
brand.
Yeah. He's an empire.
Yeah. Well, no, he's not an empire. He's just a brand. He's
Well,
just a name that's slapped onto something. A
yeah.
Nike shoe is only worth $36 until it has the swish. So, and that's all Trump has ever been. He's
Yeah.
a great businessman. We've talked about the fact
Yeah.
that if he had taken his father's money and just put it in the stock market, he would be richer now than he is. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
That's the gauge of success is if you were able to do better than the average, then you are a success. Otherwise,
Right.
you're just average. And he's been walking around saying that he's a success all these years, but never really was one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, perfect example of that is you ran a scam university, and B, you've bankrupted four casinos,
A casino
four of them,
where the house always wins.
four.
Yeah, and that's what he, pulled back on. He stopped building a long time ago, but sold his name to the developer to put on the building and then
Right.
called it his own, but it was never actually his. And that's why I think he does have, people that he's beholden to that we don't really know about, which is why we have the story of, that and he sucks Putin's nipple, but also, the thought that Russia owns him, you
Yeah.
know? And and I think that one of the reasons why he wanted so badly to win this is to stay out of prison.
Oh,
And
100%. I would too.
right?
Because he was eventually in the, I would have, I feel like, especially if he would not have won this election, within the next 2 years, he was going to do time.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
don't think for the stuff that he was already sentenced for, I think ultimately they were going to call that time served and good.
right.
But the bigger stuff that would have come to fruition,
Yeah.
especially if a Democrat had won,
Yeah. And
they
actually
would.
and actually got the DOJ to,
Right.
stick to doing their job
Yeah.
instead of making
Yeah.
everything political.
Not that they were purposely gonna prosecute him. It's not on purpose. Like, you
They
get
follow the
prosecuted
evidence.
because you
That's what
broke the
law
law.
enforcement is.
Right. And
So,
as we have seen with these judges and lawyers that come out and speak of why things happened,
mhm,
it's because the law says this,
right.
not because you're a political affiliate of this.
Right.
And
Right. Except
that's
for except for now, the amount of billionaires that we're making, well, they're probably only going to be millionaires, but the amount of millionaires that we are creating by sanctioning their business, which is a First Amendment violation, by talking bad about a business or a person, is, by the president, is the exact reason why the First Amendment was created. You know,
right. Yeah.
this whole sending people to different countries when they're U.S. citizens on accident. Um, you know,
A
and
thousand
then
miles
and then
away from where they
violating
were arrested at that.
and then grabbing people off the streets with some Gestapo bullshit. Like those people deserve to get rich at this point because their constitutional rights were violated by our federal government.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And then how are they treated while they're in custody? Um, because he's essentially begging, I forget which judge it is now, or maybe he asked the Supreme Court. I don't remember exactly, but there was a judge that told him they had to stop deporting certain people, and he is essentially asked the Supreme Court, I think now I remember right, to allow him to continue that. And depending,
Based on 19 or 1790s Alien Enemies Act, which
yeah,
like if you have to reach back to anything to justify your um your xenophobic, bigoted, um Gestapo um fear mongering
yeah,
and deportation of citizens,
yeah.
then
Let's go back to the era of slave days to
right,
justify why I'm
exactly.
doing it.
Exactly. So, like the fact that anybody is looking at that and saying, see, he was right." No, he bought the Supreme Court. They are beholden to him because some of the stuff, even Amy Coney Barrett is defecting because she isn't beholden,
Yeah.
but there are others that clearly, are beholden to the Republican Party
Oh
because
yeah.
of the way that they are voting on things. They're not even coming up with good reasons. They're not like their explanations for the way that they voted are sometimes just because.
Yeah.
Like because I'm the Supreme Court. And
Yeah.
when all three branches of the government fall on the same party in their majority without holding a majority of the votes across that period of time, we've misstepped. And on top of that, they're still getting nothing fucking done. So, like, at what
Yeah.
point do we start holding people accountable for not doing anything? And then the things that they do are non-issues until they made it an issue.
The the point that we start holding them accountable is midterms in 2026.
That's That's the idea. And I encourage anybody that listen to this to take a look at the time that they have and that they could lend to whatever party that you want, even if it's the Republican Party, as long as you're taking it back from MAGA, I don't care. Like we've both voted Republican. We both
Yep.
have Republican tendencies, but the Republican Party is not something that I recognize anymore. And until they take that back, they're part of the problem. So, if you're looking to make a difference, take a look at some of the time that you have, even if it's just calling numbers for the party that you prefer. Those are ways to get involved. One of my biggest reasons for wanting to do this was to impart the need for informed voting and sit and honoring the civic duty that you owe the Constitution that gives you the freedoms that you enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just having conversation with my fiance at dinner a couple nights ago about how people, I guess we'll just leave it at that. But mainly we are talking about our kids' generation and their work ethic and the not your kids I know because I know them and my kids and some other people's kids, but that generation as a whole, their lack of work ethic and their lack of respect. A, we both agreed that I feel like it would probably do us some good for everyone when they turn 18 to at least go to a 90-day military boot camp. I think it would help with structure and respect and responsibility. And if you can get those things down, you can be a pretty productive citizen to society
Yeah.
in this country. At least that would be a good start at 19 years old coming out of high school, especially if you don't know what you want to do and don't want to go to trade or college. That could get you some time to become a man or a woman instead of a boy or a girl thinking that the world owes you everything. And then two is I feel like I think it's our greatest right is to vote. Um, and I just wish that we could go. I wish it was mandatory that everyone that's 18 and able to vote the year of an election should vote. I also wish we could go back to when we were kids. Our parents got the day off of work to go vote.
Yeah.
Without using PTO.
Yeah.
And I would like to go back to that.
Yeah, that's a one of the wars on poverty. You deny people their voice by not giving them the opportunity to exercise that right. And the
Yeah.
fact that it's not our biggest national holiday, I find to be despicable. There are other nations that make it a national holiday. There's nothing allowed to be open
Right.
except for essential services, and even those people are given a half day to get their
Go
vote in.
cast your vote.
Yes.
If it's for the people, by the people,
Yeah.
allow the people to vote.
Yep. The 4th of July is nothing without our ability to vote.
Right.
Christmas. I won't even go there. New Year's.
Santa.
New Year's isn't a celebration unless we have a country worth celebrating.
Right. Yeah, because we'd be on somebody else's calendar essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
For those holidays. So yeah, I mean, I think the overall most important part of that segment is vote. 2026 is going to be here before we know it.
Yep. Get involved.
Stay informed.
Plan your day to vote.
Yeah, stay informed. Learn, look stuff up, understand what reliable sources are. Hit us up.
Come and check us out because we'll do some of that work for you.
Yep. Yeah, let us know where we're getting, want to know where we're getting our information from and, other than our experiences. Glad to share them with you. If you know anyone who's a Republican or MAGA that wants to come on, because we're apparently struggling to get any of those on because apparently they're just some keyboard warriors and like to talk, behind a screen instead of on screen.
Yep.
Probably because they don't want to get fact checked, but that's okay. Because they're just going to post that off as bias anyway. So with that being said, we'll see you next week. Stay tuned. Hit the like button, share it, tell your friends, and see you next time.
Thanks a lot.